Security, get her out.
Sir, she came in through the side door.
I don't care how she got in. She's making a mess here.
Gerald Ashworth snapped his fingers toward the black girl on the other side of the ballroom. The hungry girl had followed the piano music inside.
Please, I just want to play the piano. I'll play for food. That's all.
Play for food?
The crowd burst into laughter.
Little girl, dogs do tricks for food. Are you a dog?
The girl didn't flinch.
No, sir. I'm a pianist.
Gerald pulled a $100 bill from his wallet. He folded it into a paper airplane. He tossed it at the girl's feet.
Here, pick it up.
The girl didn't pick it up. What nobody understood was that this girl was about to make them all feel insignificant. Her name was Imani Fletcher. And 6 hours before Gerald Ashworth flicked a paper airplane at her feet, she woke up under a pedestrian overpass near the Chicago Riverwalk. December air doesn't ask permission. It cuts. Through the sleeping bag held together with duct tape. Through the 2 shirts she wore to bed. Through the hoodie she'd had since she was 16, the one that used to be her father's. The zipper had been broken for a year. She held it closed with a safety pin. Imani sat up, breath coming out in thin, white clouds. She folded her belongings into a single backpack, a toothbrush, a pair of clean socks, a phone with a cracked screen and no service. And one thing she protected with her life, a worn leather notebook, every page filled with hand-drawn piano keys and musical notation written in pencil. That notebook was her piano. She walked 22 blocks to the community kitchen on West Madison. Same walk every morning, same route, past the same liquor store, the same boarded-up laundromat, the same intersection where a man once offered her $40 for something she would never sell. She kept her eyes forward. She always kept her eyes forward. The kitchen was warm. It smelled like instant oatmeal and industrial soap. She sat where she always sat, near the back, where she could see the door. She ate quietly. A metal tray, a plastic spoon, powdered eggs that tasted like nothing. Around her, the usual sounds, spoons scraping metal trays, a television no one watched, a child crying somewhere near the entrance. After eating, she washed her face in the restroom, braided her hair tight, and walked to the bench outside. She opened the notebook on her knees, spread her fingers across the drawn keys, closed her eyes, and played. No sound, just her fingers pressing paper, her lips counting time in silence, her body swaying to music only she could hear. People walked by. Most didn't look. One woman dropped a quarter near her foot. Imani didn't notice. She was somewhere else entirely, somewhere with a real piano, a warm room, and a man sitting beside her on the bench. Behind the serving counter inside, a white-haired woman in an apron, one of the volunteers, watched Imani through the window. She watched the way the girl's fingers moved across the paper. Not random, not fidgeting, precise, musical. The woman's eyes stayed a beat too long. Then she said nothing. She ladled another bowl of oatmeal and moved on. Nobody knew her name yet, but she'd been watching Imani for weeks. Imani didn't start on the streets. Nobody does. Her father's name was Calvin Moore, jazz pianist, South Side. He played small clubs that paid in drink tickets and applause. He never made it big, never recorded an album, never played a stage with his name on the marquee. But he could play. He started teaching Imani when she was 4, an old upright piano in their apartment on Cottage Grove, scratched, slightly out of tune, with a dead key at the top end. Didn't matter. Calvin sat her on his lap, put her hands on the keys, and said a sentence she would carry for the rest of her life. Posture first, then heart. The notes come last. By 8, she was playing Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. Not perfectly, but the feeling was there, raw, unpolished, and impossible to teach. By 12, she was performing at local recitals. Teachers called her gifted. Calvin said something simpler. "You're my encore, baby girl. The best thing I ever played. Their last night together was a Tuesday. Calvin sat beside her on the bench. She played the melody. His left hand played the bass line underneath, low, steady, like a heartbeat. He didn't correct her once, didn't say a word, just played alongside her, his shoulder touching hers. That was their last Tuesday. Thursday, he didn't come home. A car accident on the Dan Ryan Expressway, dead on impact. Imani was 14. What followed was the kind of collapse that doesn't happen all at once. It happens in layers. First, the grief. Then, the rent. Imani's mother, Rhonda, had been fighting lupus for years. Without Calvin's income, she couldn't keep the apartment. They lost the apartment in March. The piano, the old upright on Cottage Grove, went with it. Rhonda entered an assisted living facility on the south side. Imani moved in with an aunt, then a cousin, then a group home. Then, by 17, the street. 5 years without a real piano. She played when she could, public uprights in train stations, a beaten-up spinet in a park pavilion that was sometimes unlocked. But her technical skill, the precision, the speed, the muscle memory, had started to erode. Rust on a blade that used to be sharp. Her ear, though. Her ear never rusted. She heard music in everything. In the rhythm of traffic on Michigan Avenue. In rain hitting the metal roof of a bus shelter. In the cadence of 2 men arguing 3/10 away. Everything had a tempo. Everything had a key. And every Tuesday afternoon, she walked to a small church on Dearborn Street. They had a Yamaha upright in the lobby. The pastor let her play for 1 hour. She never missed a Tuesday. She chose Tuesdays for a reason. Now here's where I need to tell you something about what's coming. Because the life I just described, the overpass, the notebook, the drawn piano keys, that life was about to collide with a world that had no idea she existed. And the collision was going to be loud. But before that, you need to understand what Imani stood to lose. The community kitchen was closing for renovations. 2 weeks. Her most stable source of food, gone. She'd heard about a women's shelter on the north side, but the wait list was long, and the commute would take her away from the only 2 things that kept her alive, the notebook and the Yamaha on Dearborn Street. If she lost access to those, if she had to leave the area, she wouldn't just lose a meal schedule. She'd lose her father. Because that's what the music was. Not a hobby, not a dream. A thread. The only thread still connecting her to the person she was before everything shattered. And threads, once broken, don't always tie back together. What Imani didn't know yet was that tonight, she'd walk into a room full of people who had everything she didn't. Money, power, the right clothes. And before the night was over, she'd make every single one of them feel like they were the ones missing something. Stay with me. Gerald Ashworth didn't walk into rooms. He occupied them. The Drake Hotel Ballroom had been transformed for the Ashworth Foundation's annual Winter Gala, a charity fundraiser for what Gerald liked to call urban renewal. What that actually meant was buying up low-income housing on the South Side and converting it into luxury condominiums. But tonight, under the crystal chandeliers, it was all tax-deductible generosity and champagne that cost more per glass than Imani spent on food in a month. Gerald arrived flanked by 2 associates in matching dark suits. His son Trent trailed a step behind. Gerald adjusted his cufflinks, platinum, monogrammed, and surveyed the room the way a landlord surveys a property he's about to flip. "The flowers look like a funeral," he said to Nora Sullivan, the event coordinator, without looking at her. "Move them." Nora nodded, jaw tight. She'd worked Gerald's events for 3 years. She knew the rules. Don't argue, don't suggest, just do. A waiter passed with a tray of champagne. Gerald snapped his fingers, didn't say please, didn't say thank you, and took 2 glasses, 1 for each hand. He handed neither to his son. "Half the people in this room got here by inheriting something," Gerald said to Trent, loud enough for the nearest table to hear. "The other half married into it. I built mine. That's the difference. Trent said nothing. He'd heard this speech before, at dinners, at board meetings, at breakfast. At the front of the ballroom, on a raised platform, sat a Steinway Model D concert grand. Black lacquer, 9 feet long. The most expensive production piano in the world. A small brass plate was mounted on its side, the name of the donor engraved in elegant script. Gerald Ashworth. He'd gifted this piano to the Drake 10 years ago, when the foundation was first established. Every time he passed it, he touched the brass plate with 2 fingers. A small gesture, almost absent-minded. But it wasn't. It was ownership. The piano was his. The room was his. The evening was his. A professional pianist had been booked for the dinner performance. Gerald had personally selected the program. All Rachmaninoff. Nothing modern, nothing trendy. Classics only. Now there's something you should know about Gerald Ashworth. He didn't think of himself as a racist. He never used slurs in board meetings. He never posted anything controversial online. He donated to the right charities. He attended the right galas. He said the right things in the right rooms. But Nora remembered the time a young black woman, a scholarship recipient, had stood up at a previous gala to give a thank you speech. Gerald had leaned over to his associate and said, loud enough for Nora to catch, "Maybe she should thank the people who actually write the checks instead of giving us a lecture." And Trent remembered the time his father rejected a qualified black architect for a development project. The reason, delivered casually over steak? The client base wouldn't feel comfortable. Gerald didn't exclude people because he hated them. He excluded them because he genuinely believed talent was proven by pedigree, by credentials, by institutions, by the right last name and the right zip code. If you didn't have those things, you hadn't earned the right to be in his room. And tonight, someone without any of those things was about to walk into his room and sit down at his piano. At 10 minutes to 8, Nora's phone buzzed. She read the message. Read it again. Her face went white. The pianist had canceled. Family emergency. Last-minute text. No replacement. Nora crossed the ballroom to Gerald, keeping her voice low. "Gerald, we have a problem. The pianist can't make it." Gerald's glass stopped halfway to his mouth. "What do you mean, can't make it?" "Family emergency. He just texted. I've been calling agencies, but it's Saturday night. I can't find anyone on this short. I'm not paying for a piano that sits there like furniture." He said it like a verdict. Then he turned back to his conversation, leaving Nora standing there with a dead phone and a Steinway that no one was going to play. The piano sat under the spotlight, silent, waiting. And outside the Drake Hotel, on the sidewalk, Imani Fletcher was walking past. She wasn't headed here. She was looking for a late-night diner on Rush Street that sometimes gave away unsold food before closing. The wind was sharp. Her fingers were numb inside her pockets. Her backpack pulled at her shoulder. Then she heard it. Not music, not exactly. The faint hum of piano strings. Residual vibration from the tuning earlier that evening, still hanging in the air, slipping through a side door, propped open by a catering worker on a smoke break. Most people wouldn't have heard it. Most people don't listen for things that aren't there. Imani stopped walking. She turned toward the door, and she stepped inside. So let me ask you something. If you were Imani, hungry, cold, invisible, and you heard the sound of the one thing you loved most in the world coming from behind a door that happened to be open, would you walk in? Or would you keep walking? The service corridor smelled like roasted lamb and starched lemon. Imani followed it toward the sound of voices, clinking glasses, laughter, the low hum of 100 conversations blending into one. She reached the edge of the ballroom and stopped. Crystal chandeliers, women in gowns that caught the light when they moved, men in black tie holding drinks like accessories, candles on every table, flowers she couldn't name. And at the front of the room, raised on a small platform under a single spotlight, a Steinway grand piano. Imani's breath caught. She had seen pianos before, uprights in churches, spinets in community centers. But this was something else. Black lacquer so deep it looked like still water. 9 feet of engineered perfection. The kind of instrument she'd only ever seen in photographs. Her right hand twitched at her side, fingers curling inward slightly, involuntarily, muscle memory reaching for keys that weren't there yet. She took a step toward it without thinking, then another. The way a person walks towards something they've been missing for 5 years. Nora Sullivan spotted her first. A girl in a stained hoodie and wet sneakers standing at the edge of a black tie gala. Nora assumed she was lost, maybe a staff member's daughter. She approached gently. "Honey, are you looking for someone?" Imani didn't look at Nora. Her eyes were locked on the piano. Can I play? Just for a few minutes. I'll leave after. I haven't played a real piano in so long." Before Nora could answer, Gerald Ashworth was already crossing the room. He'd seen the disruption from across the ballroom, a stained hoodie and a sea of black tie. He moved toward it the way you'd move toward a stain on a white tablecloth, with irritation, not urgency. He stepped between Imani and the piano, physically blocked her. Then he placed his hand flat on the Steinway's lid, palm down, fingers spread. The gesture of a man touching something that belonged to him. "This is a private event. How did you even get in here?" The door was open. "I just wanted to play. I can play for food if you want. I don't need money." Gerald turned to the crowd. A small audience had gathered now. Guests pausing mid-conversation, champagne glasses suspended. "Play for food. That's adorable." He smiled at the nearest table. "Apparently, we have a volunteer." A few guests laughed. Uncomfortable, uncertain, but they laughed. Gerald stepped closer to Imani, close enough that she could smell his cologne. He lowered his voice, but not enough. The tables nearby heard every word. "You don't belong here. Not at this piano. Not in this room. Not in this building." He reached into his jacket, pulled out $100 bill, folded it slowly, deliberately, into a paper airplane, the same one from the beginning of this story. He held it up so the nearest guest could see, then he flicked it at her feet. "There, go buy yourself something, somewhere else." The bill landed on the marble floor and spun once before stopping near her left sneaker. Silence. Not the comfortable kind, the kind that presses against your chest. A few guests looked down at their plates. Trent Ashworth stared at the far wall. Nora's hand went to her mouth. Nobody said a word. The silence stretched. 5 seconds. 10. Gerald stood with his arms folded, waiting for her to leave. She didn't leave. Nora Sullivan, voice barely steady, stepped forward. "Gerald, the pianist canceled. We don't have anyone for tonight. Maybe we could just let her try?" Gerald's jaw tightened. He looked at Nora, looked at the empty platform, looked at the guests who were now watching him instead of looking away. He was trapped, but not by Nora's suggestion, by his own audience. Walking away now would mean admitting the evening had a hole he couldn't fill. And Gerald Ashworth did not have holes in his evenings. So he did something worse than refusing. He agreed. Fine. He turned to Imani with a smile that had nothing warm in it. "Let's hear what playing for food sounds like." He gestured toward the Steinway with a mocking half-bow. "Go ahead, sweetheart. Show us what the streets taught you." Scattered applause, thin, uncertain. The sound of people clapping because they didn't know what else to do. Imani stood motionless, the paper airplane at her feet, the Steinway behind Gerald. 200 faces watching. And now the question that everyone in that room was thinking, whether they admitted it or not. Does she dare sit down? And if she does, can she actually play? Imani didn't move. The ballroom waited. Gerald's smirk waited. The paper airplane on the marble floor waited. And inside Imani's head, a war was happening that no one in that room could see. 5 years. 5 years since she'd touched a concert-quality instrument. Her fingers were calloused from cold, not from practice. The last time she played a Steinway was never. The last time she played anything with more than 61 working keys was a Tuesday afternoon in a church lobby 3 weeks ago. What if she sat down and fumbled? What if her hands locked up? What if the muscle memory she'd been training on paper, on drawn keys, in silence, on a bench outside a soup kitchen, turned out to be nothing more than pretend? What if Gerald was right? She looked at the piano. She looked at the paper airplane on the floor. She looked at Gerald's face, the patient, amused expression of a man who had already won. Then she looked down at her own hands. They were trembling, slightly. But she noticed something she hadn't thought about in a long time. Her fingers were long, flexible, the same shape as her father's, the same reach, the same angle at the wrist. These hands played Chopin at 8 years old. These hands don't forget. She looked up. The alternative was walking away, back into the cold, back to the overpass, carrying the memory of a man who folded money into an airplane and threw it at her feet for the rest of her life. That memory would outlast the cold. That memory would outlast everything. Or she could sit down. Imani set her backpack on the floor, unzipped her hoodie. Underneath, a plain black t-shirt, worn thin at the collar. She walked to the piano. She didn't look at Gerald. She didn't look at the crowd. She didn't say a single word. She sat on the bench, adjusted the height, muscle memory from a decade ago, her body remembering before her mind caught up. She placed her fingers on the keys without pressing them, closed her eyes, drew one slow breath. And then her back straightened, slowly, deliberately, as if someone had placed a hand on her shoulder and corrected her posture. Her lips moved, almost invisible. 3 words, no sound. Posture first, Dad. Gerald folded his arms, still smirking. The room was frozen, forks suspended, conversations dead. Nora took a step back. Trent leaned forward. Nobody heard what she whispered. Nobody was meant to. That conversation wasn't for them. And then, silence. The kind that splits time in two, a before and an after. No one in that room knew it yet, but they were standing right on the line. The first note was wrong. Not a clashing, obvious mistake, just hesitant. The opening phrase of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor is supposed to unfold like a question whispered in an empty cathedral. Imani's version sounded like someone asking that question with a shaking voice. Her fingers were stiff. 5 years of cold, 5 years of paper keys, 5 years of muscle memory slowly dissolving. All of it announced itself in the first 4 bars. A grace note stumbled. A transition landed a fraction too late. The tone was thin where it should have been full. Gerald Ashworth nodded. Small. Satisfied. He glanced at the nearest table. A quick, sideways look that said everything without words. See? What did I tell you? Trent shifted his weight. Nora pressed her fingernails into her palms. The ballroom held its breath. Not in anticipation, but in second-hand embarrassment. And then something happened. The Steinway answered. Not metaphorically, physically. The resonance of a concert grand is different from anything Imani had touched in 5 years. The sound didn't just come from the strings. It rose through the keys, traveled up her fingertips, climbed her wrists, and settled deep in her chest. The overtones filled the ballroom ceiling, bounced off marble and crystal, and wrapped around her like a memory she'd forgotten she had. Her shoulders dropped. Her breathing slowed. Her left hand found a bass note, and she felt it. The exact position Calvin used to place his hand. Same reach, same angle, same weight on the key. She was sitting the way her father sat. By the second theme, the stumbling was gone. Not gradually, not slowly. Gone. As if a switch had been flipped somewhere between her hands and her heart. The notes stopped being correct and started being alive. The phrasing shifted from recitation to conversation, the kind you have with someone you haven't seen in a very long time and aren't sure you'll ever see again. A woman at the third table set her wine glass down. Carefully, deliberately. She didn't pick it up again. A man in his 60s loosened his tie. Not because he was warm, because something in his chest needed more room. Trent Ashworth leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped together. A waiter carrying a tray of desserts stopped mid-step in the aisle between tables. The tray tilted slightly in his hand. He didn't notice. He didn't care. He just stood there, listening, like everyone else. An elderly couple near the back reached for each other's hands at the same time. Neither looked at the other. They just held on. And Gerald unfolded his arms. Not a decision, a reflex. His body reacting before his mind could overrule it. The smirk was still there, but the edges had gone soft. It was no longer the smile of a man who was right. It was the expression of a man standing on ground that had just shifted beneath his feet. Imani's left hand rolled through a passage like distant thunder. Her right hand sang a melody above it, climbing, falling, climbing again. A conversation between grief and hope, between a daughter on a bench and a father who would never sit beside her again. Her body began to sway, chin lifting, eyes still closed. She wasn't performing anymore. She wasn't proving anything to anyone. She was remembering. Now let me stop here and ask you something. Have you ever watched someone do the thing they were born to do? Not the thing they studied for, not the thing they practiced in a classroom, the thing that lives in their bones, that would come out even if you locked every door and took away every instrument and told them they weren't good enough. That's what the people in this room were watching. And most of them were only just starting to understand it. The ballad moved into its development section. Darker, more complex, the music twisting and folding like a river changing direction underground. Imani navigated passages that most conservatory students spend months drilling. Arpeggios stretching across 4 octaves, chromatic runs requiring each finger to land within a millimeter of precision. She played them the way most people breathe, without thinking, without permission. Nora Sullivan was crying, silently. Tears running down both cheeks, hands clasped in front of her mouth, her whole body trembling with the effort of staying quiet. Then came the moment. There's a passage in Chopin's Ballade No. 1, about 2/3 through, where the music pulls back to almost nothing. A single sustained note. A breath. The entire composition narrows to a point so small and so fragile, you could hold it between 2 fingers and feel it vibrating. Imani held that note. The room held it with her. 3 seconds of silence. 5 seconds. The chandelier above the piano cast a slow-moving pattern of light across her closed eyelids. Nobody moved. Nobody whispered. Nobody breathed. 200 people in a ballroom, and it was the quietest place in Chicago. In that silence, Gerald Ashworth swallowed. His throat moved, a small, involuntary contraction that he couldn't control and couldn't hide. The kind of thing you'd only notice if you were looking directly at him. Trent was looking directly at him. Someone at the very back whispered, barely audible, more to themselves than anyone else, "Oh my God." No voiceover here. No commentary. No narration. just the silence and the last dying hum of a single note hanging in a ballroom full of people who had forgotten how to exhale. Then, the storm. Imani launched into the ballad's coda, the final section, where Chopin stops whispering and starts screaming. Cascading runs tumbling down the keyboard like water breaking through a dam. Octave passages demanding both power and precision. Fortissimo chords hitting the air like fists on a locked door. The kind of playing that separates the gifted from the great, the trained from the chosen, the people who learned music from the people music chose. Her fingers blurred across the keys. The Steinway roared. Not the polished roar of a conservatory recital, the raw, unchained, furious roar of 5 years of sleeping under overpasses and drawing keyboards on notebook paper and losing a father on a Thursday afternoon and being compared to a dog by a man in a suit who had never once in his life been hungry. Every note carried the weight of something she'd never been allowed to say out loud. Every chord was a sentence she'd been holding behind her teeth for half a decade, and now the dam was broken, and every single one was pouring out at once. A child sitting with her parent stopped fidgeting. Her mouth fell open. She stared at Imani's hands as if watching something impossible happen right in front of her. Something no one had warned her the world was capable of. An old man near the center, silver hair, military medals on his lapel, pushed back his chair and stood. He didn't clap. He didn't speak. He just stood. The way you stand when something demands it. The way you stand at attention for something that outranks every rank you've ever held. Phones came out. Not one, not two, dozens. Blue screens glowing in the darkened ballroom like a constellation forming in real time. Every screen pointed at the same place. Every lens aimed at the same pair of hands. Nora was still crying, clapping through her tears without realizing she'd started. The final octave runs, passages that professional pianists struggle with, that competition judges use to separate contenders from pretenders, that music professors point to and say, "This is where you find out who someone really is." Imani played them clean. Every note, precise, deliberate, ferocious. Dynamic range stretching from a whisper that barely stirred the air to a sound that shook the water in the crystal glasses and rattled silverware against china. Then the final chord. Both hands came down. She held them there. The Steinway sang, one massive, resonant chord that filled the entire ballroom, bounced off marble, rang through every chandelier, and then slowly, slowly, faded into nothing. She lifted her hands, placed them in her lap. Silence. 2 full seconds of absolute silence. But she wasn't done. Without pause, her hands returned to the keys. She began playing something no one recognized, because it didn't exist yet, never been played, never been written down, never been heard by any human ear. It was being born right now, under this spotlight, on a piano a billionaire donated 10 years ago to prove how important he was. An improvisation. Jazz melody. Tender, intimate, woven through with classical harmony. 2 musical languages braided into something that belonged to neither and both. Her father's voice and her own. 2 generations in one pair of hands. And then something extraordinary happened. Her left hand began playing a bass line. Not random, specific. The exact bass line Calvin Moore played beside her on their last Tuesday night together, the night before the Thursday he didn't come home. Low, steady, repeating. Like a heartbeat that refused to stop even after the body it belonged to was gone. Her right hand played the melody above it. Her part. The daughter's part. For the first time in 5 years, both parts were being played at the same time. She was playing his role and hers. The father and the daughter, the one who left and the one who stayed, the heartbeat and the voice that still needed it. The music was quiet, gentle, almost conversational. It sounded like a girl sitting beside an empty chair, talking to someone who couldn't answer back, telling him things she'd been saving for 5 years. About the overpass, the notebook, the drawn keys, the Tuesdays she never missed because he was the reason she chose that day. The sound of his piano she still heard every night before falling asleep under a bridge in December. She played for 90 seconds, then stopped, gently. The way you set down something fragile, something you've been carrying so long, your arms have forgotten what it feels like to be empty. Her hands trembled, not from nerves, not from cold, from release. She opened her eyes. The ballroom was blurred. She blinked twice, and when her vision cleared, she saw 200 people standing on their feet, and one man still standing exactly where he'd been 10 minutes ago, arms at his sides, face completely empty, with a paper airplane still lying on the marble floor between them. The ballroom exploded. Not polite applause, not the careful, measured clapping of people who attend galas and know when to start and when to stop. This was a roar, raw, uncontained. The kind of sound that comes from 200 people who just experienced something they weren't prepared for and don't know how to process except through their hands. Chairs scraped against marble as guests stood, not one by one, in waves, like dominoes made of people. Hands clapping above heads. Someone at the back shouted, "Brava!" and the word carried across the room like a match thrown into dry grass. The woman who'd set down her wineglass was standing with both hands pressed to her chest, fingers spread, as if trying to hold something inside her ribcage that was trying to get out. The man who'd loosened his tie was applauding, with his arms fully extended above his head, the way you'd applaud at a stadium, not a charity dinner. Nora Sullivan was still crying. She hadn't stopped. She was clapping through the tears, mascara streaking down both cheeks, and she didn't care. She didn't even know. Trent Ashworth was on his feet, clapping hard, harder than anyone in his section. And he was looking at his father. The child who'd been staring tugged her mother's dress. "Mommy, is she famous?" The mother's voice cracked on the answer. "She should be." The old veteran near the center, the one who'd stood up during the coda, didn't clap. He just nodded, slow, once, toward Imani. A nod between two people who understood what it meant to fight for something when the odds said you shouldn't bother. No words necessary. None would have been enough. And Gerald Ashworth stood motionless, arms at his sides, not folded, not crossed, just hanging. The posture of a man whose skeleton was still standing, but whose certainty had left the building. His face. Let me describe his face. It wasn't anger. Anger would have been easier. Anger has direction. Anger knows what to do with itself. This was something worse. This was the slow, visible, real-time collapse of a man realizing that the last 20 minutes had rewritten every assumption he'd ever had about who deserved to be in his room, at his piano, in his world. And the rewriting had been done by a 19-year-old girl in a stained hoodie who hadn't even raised her voice. His jaw moved. No words came out. His eyes dropped to the floor, to the paper airplane, the $100 bill he'd folded and flicked at her feet, still lying on the marble, exactly where it had landed. In the middle of a standing ovation, surrounded by 200 people who were now looking at him and the paper airplane, and understanding exactly what kind of man folds money into a toy and throws it at a hungry teenager. He didn't pick it up. He didn't apologize. He took one half step backward, small, involuntary, the kind of retreat your body makes before your brain authorizes it, the kind of step that says everything a mouth refuses to. Trent watched him take that step, And for the first time in 30 years, Trent didn't look away. He looked directly at his father's face, held the gaze, steady, unblinking. Gerald was the one who turned away. The room was still roaring when Imani stood up from the bench. She wasn't triumphant. She wasn't gloating. She wasn't performing a victory lap. She was calm, the deep, settled calm of a person who has just remembered something they were afraid they'd forgotten. She looked at Gerald, not with anger, not with defiance, not with the satisfaction of someone who'd won, with something quieter than all of those things, something that didn't need a name. You asked what the streets taught me. Her voice was soft, almost lost in the applause. They taught me that a piano doesn't care who's sitting at it. She picked up her backpack. The room was still on its feet. There's a word for what just happened. It's not revenge. Revenge is loud, and it needs an audience. This was something quieter. This was proof, offered without apology, received without condition. And the thing about proof is, once it's in the room, you can't unfeel it. Imani made it halfway to the service corridor before Nora Sullivan caught her. "Wait, please, just wait." Imani turned, backpack already on her shoulder, body angled toward the door, the posture of someone who had spent 5 years learning how to leave places before anyone asked her to. Nora's mascara was ruined. Her hands were shaking. "You're not leaving without eating. Not tonight, not from this building." She walked Imani to a quiet side room off the main kitchen and came back with a full plate, the same plate being served to guests in the ballroom. Roasted lamb, potatoes gratin, asparagus with hollandaise, a cloth napkin, real silverware, a glass of water with ice. Imani looked at the plate for a long time before picking up the fork. Her hand trembled, not from the performance, from the fact that this was the first meal she'd eaten with real silverware in longer than she could remember. She ate slowly, carefully, the way someone eats when they're not sure the food is really for them. While she ate, the door kept opening. Guests, one by one, business cards between their fingers. A woman in a dark green gown, board member of the Chicago Symphony's education outreach, pressed a card into Imani's hand. "Call me Monday. I mean it." A retired attorney asked if she had any recordings. Imani shook her head. He left his card anyway. A younger couple asked if she gave lessons. Imani almost laughed. Almost. She held the cards in her lap, like they might dissolve if she gripped too hard. She wasn't used to being seen. Not like this. Not as a person with something to offer, instead of something to remove. Then the door opened one more time. 71 years old, white hair cut short. No gown, no jewelry. Plain cardigan over a blouse. She'd clearly come from somewhere else in a hurry. Nora had called her 20 minutes ago. Her name was Dolores Crawford. And Imani recognized her. Not her name. Her face. The volunteer behind the serving counter at the community kitchen on West Madison. The woman who ladled oatmeal every morning and watched Imani through the window. The woman who saw fingers moving across drawn piano keys on a notebook and said nothing. For weeks, she just watched and waited. Dolores pulled a chair next to Imani and sat down. She didn't gush, she didn't cry, she didn't say, "That was beautiful," or "You're amazing." She spoke the way one musician speaks to another. "Your Chopin was raw. Your left hand rushes in the development section. Your pedaling needs discipline." No one had given Imani a technical critique in 5 years. Dolores paused, then quieter. But that improvisation at the end, that bass line, that wasn't random. That was someone else's voice. Whose? Imani looked at her hands, the hands that had just played both parts on a Steinway in front of 200 strangers. "My father's. He played jazz. He died when I was 14. Dolores was quiet for a long moment. Then, softly, he's still playing. Neither of them spoke for a while after that. The noise from the ballroom filtered through, muffled applause, conversation, clinking glasses, a different world behind one door. Then Dolores reached into her cardigan pocket. She pulled out a single key on a plain ring. I have a piano at home, Boston Grand, not a Steinway, but it's real and it's tuned. Come play whenever you want. No strings, no schedule, just music. Imani stared at the key. She looked at Dolores, really looked at her. And for the first time all evening, her eyes filled with something that wasn't pain. She picked up the key, closed her fist around it, held it the way you hold something that might save your life. 1 week later, a guest's phone video surfaced online. The caption, "Homeless girl crashes billionaire's gala. What happens next will wreck you." 4 million views in 3 days. Elliot Bradshaw, a music professor at Juilliard, saw the video on a Wednesday morning, watched it 3 times. By Thursday, he'd called Dolores Crawford. By Friday, he had Imani's name. He offered a full audition, and if she passed, a scholarship. The door didn't swing wide open. This wasn't a fairy tale. But for the first time in 5 years, there was a crack of light coming through. And Imani Fletcher knew what to do with light. She'd been practicing for it in the dark her entire life. As for Gerald Ashworth, he was not redeemed. But he was changed. The viral video forced the Ashworth Foundation board to issue a public statement about inclusivity and representation. Gerald was quietly removed from the gala planning committee. Trent Ashworth, for the first time in his life, cast a vote against his father on a board motion. Gerald never apologized publicly. But sometimes the punishment isn't a sentence, it's a mirror. And Gerald Ashworth had just seen his reflection in a room full of witnesses. This story isn't about a piano. It's about what happens when someone looks at another person, at their clothes, their skin, their shoes, their address, and decides that's the whole story, that there's nothing underneath worth discovering, that the cover is the book. Gerald Ashworth looked at Imani Fletcher and saw a problem to remove. He didn't see a musician. He didn't see a daughter. He didn't see 5 years of practicing on drawn keys in a notebook on a bench outside a soup kitchen in December. He saw a stained hoodie and a pair of wet sneakers, and he decided the story was finished. But here's what people like Gerald never account for. Talent doesn't need permission. It doesn't need a tuxedo. It doesn't need a seat at your table or your name on a donor plaque. It just needs one unlocked door and 3 seconds of silence before the first note. Imani had both. And she walked through one and filled the other with something that 200 people will carry with them for the rest of their lives. Do we laugh along? Do we look at our plates? Do we fold our money into paper airplanes? Or do we step back and let someone sit down at the piano? If this story left a mark, if you felt something when those hands hit the keys, hit subscribe. Every week, we tell stories about people the world wrote off and the moments that proved the world wrong. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. You never know who's carrying a notebook full of drawn piano keys, waiting for an unlocked door. And drop a comment below. I want to know. Have you ever been dismissed before someone saw what you could really do? What's your drawn keyboard moment, the thing you kept practicing even when nobody believed you could? Next week, a janitor at a Fortune 500 company solves a problem that stumped the entire engineering team, and the CEO's reaction will leave you speechless. One last question before you go. If Imani had walked away from that piano, if she'd picked up that paper airplane and disappeared into the cold, would anyone in that room have ever known what they almost missed? And how many Imanis are out there right now, walking past doors we forgot to leave open?
Let me tell you something I'll never forget after this story. Never look down on someone just because they have less than you, because what someone has and what someone can do, those are two completely different things. You can have nothing in the pocket and still carry something inside you that money can't buy. And the people who laugh the loudest, they're usually the ones who understand the least. They see the outside and they think the conversation is over, but it's not. It's a beginning. And when the truth comes out, they are the ones left standing there with nothing to say. So be careful who you dismiss. Be careful who you mock, because you don't know what someone is carrying inside them. And the one day, they might show you, and you won't be laughed anymore. Like, share, and subscribe. Real stories, real justice, every week. And remember, never judge someone can give by what they don't have.